everybody. My name is Barbara Kolm, and I'm the Austrian. Not only based in Austria, but being one of the few Austrian economists that live in Austria. All the others have left Austria for a good reason, or many have left Europe for even better reasons, as you know what is going on right now in Europe, to travel the world and to defend reason and Austrian economics and freedom and free markets. It's my privilege to run the first panel. I was actually supposed to speak, but believing in Hayek and spontaneous order, we decided to be a bit more flexible and give more time, room actually, to questions and answers. And I would just give you two more backgrounds. One of them is the Free Market Roadshow started out in Europe 9 years ago. We did 4 cities, 4 capitals. This year, we toured, in the 9th year, we toured 40 countries, 40 nations, and 45 cities. And gentlemen here on the panel have been part of that. They did not do all the 45. I'm really disappointed you did not, and John also only
We're
did
training up.
Yes, did like 10 or something like that. But the secret of the roadshow is it's a network of 127 institutions, think tanks, universities that we bring together and that we coordinate in Europe that have the same idea. They fight for freedom. And as you know, what is going on, as I mentioned before, Europe is not a place where freedom is standing very high. We live with Brussels, which is our central planning organization. We have politicians who are completely detached from reality, who live in their own parallel universe, and then are surprised when all of a sudden citizens vote against their ideas and are surprised, oh, Brexit really happens. How was this only possible? We did not plan that. And then they try to vote as long as possible or try to get it and change it. Luckily, this will not happen, hopefully. And this is also the first big test for the European Union, if it can really survive. And since I am an economist, I do not give predictions, but I have a good guess that we are on the right path and regaining our freedom again.
You mean since you're an Austrian economist?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much for this correction. Well, I feel at home here in this room. So, without further ado, so the history of the roadshow starts for the first time in the United States this year. We already did 4 events in Chicago at Heartland Institute, at Rockford, University of Rockford, and 2 in Bloomington, Indiana. This is the 3rd one here, the 3rd city that we visit. And by that, I would really like to thank our partners and our sponsors and everybody who we have been working with, the Thoreaus and the Independent Institute. Thanks a lot. The Ayn Rand Institute, Joram Broek. It's a big pleasure to work again with you that are in Europe. And most importantly, our host here, John Chisholm. Who is, as I mentioned, not only a roadshow veteran, but he's also an author. We have plenty of authors here at this distinguished panels, and I would invite you, their books are all around in this room, to grab them and have them signed. Those books, of course, are for sale. The other things from the Liberty Fund are for display only, and Yaron told me that the displays from the Ayn Rand Institute are for free, and you can take those books. And if there are students around...
Everything on our table, too.
Oh, wonderful. And of course, Independent Institute is very gracious again and provides us with books for free as well. And there are students here and young people. You should grab the Ayn Rand books if you have not read them yet, because, of course, you're a privileged sort. There are 2 more groups that I would like to thank. Liberty Fund, without their partnership also in Europe, it would not be possible, and the Templeton Foundation, who are those people and the foundation behind the roadshow in the US. Otherwise, it would not have been possible for a humble, small European institution like ours, the Austrian Economic Center, to bring over those ideas. But again, as you see, they have worked in Europe since we're growing steadily. We hope to be able to partner with many more institutions here in the United States. So without further ado, the first topic is on the American dream. And we actually had the idea of calling it Why the US Must Not Become Europe. So sluggish growth in Europe. Politicians consider 0.7 growth rates a success. We are as bad right now. Increasing unemployment, youth unemployment being more than 50% in many countries, whether it's Spain, Italy, Greece, you have all heard that. Brexit now a big challenge for the politicians, not so much for the citizens, because we have calculations that at worst case, it costs 776 euros per capita per individual in Great Britain until 2030. At best guess, it costs 636 euros per capita. No, it gains 636 euros per capita. So if the Brits do it wisely, it's a success. So this is where we stand, but we do have enormous socialism, welfareism in Europe. This is why we have many people coming in from the middle of Africa, especially coming to Europe. And we cannot cope with these problems. So we said, we better give a warning of why the US must not become Europe. And without further ado, I turn it over to the panel here, and I would like to ask you right away to give us our ideas of why the American, or what happens with the American dream. I do not need to introduce the gentleman here because you all have your slides here, or your paper here, and I ask you to please fill out the forms and the questionnaire because we need to return them, and this is a big help to us. Lastly, we continue tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with a workshop for those of you who have time and join us for coffee and want to get into more depth than this event allows today, then feel free to join us. Otherwise, sign up for the books for everything. Thank you. Please, go on.
Thank you. Well, before I get started, I wanted to tell you that in Sacramento today, the tax board met to decide how to tax space travel. I'm not kidding. So the planners are way ahead of all of us here. They're always looking forward to gathering more revenue. So yeah, space travel now is on their radar. And they held a hearing today in Sacramento on that. So I'm going to start out with a quote from a great American philosopher, George Carlin, the comedian, who said, "It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." And so, that's very pessimistic. I'm not sure that I'm that pessimistic about the future, but I'm getting there. The more I thought about this the last few days and gathered my notes for my talk today. So I'm going to start out with, I think there's in my mind, there's two prime elements of the American dream. And one is to be able to pursue the occupation of your choice. That's kind of like a general prime tenet of what we kind of stand for in America or have in the past. And increasingly, it's more and more difficult to pursue your occupation of choice because of occupational licensing laws. So to look at back in 1950, only 5% of occupations were licensed. But today, it's 30% of occupations are licensed, and it's growing. So it's increasingly more difficult to just set up your own shop and start a business of your own in the area that you want to pursue. So I think that's a real diminishment of what most people would consider the American dream. In Nevada, it takes 733 days and a fee of $1,500 to become not a nurse, but a travel guide. So just to be a travel guide, for example, at Lake Mead, you have to spend more than 2 years in training to do that occupation. And I think it's a case where the left has kind of overplayed their hand, and I think they've created so many barriers now to occupations around the country that it's actually gotten to the point of being absurd, like this example. So I know when I was at the API meetings in Las Vegas earlier this year, Chip Miller talked about, he's the president of IJ, the Institute for Justice, and he talked about this as like a prime area for the future to go after, just because these barriers have become so pervasive and so extreme and so unrelated to actually practicing the occupation well. And of course, the impact tends to be disproportionately on the poor and low income groups. So it's a huge drag on entrepreneurship. So I think that's, unfortunately though, we've seen a growth in that over time. I think it's led to a real diminishment in the American dream, especially for a lot of low income people. And another item that I wanted to point out is workforce dropouts, which is becoming a real problem it's a big problem in Europe already, but it's becoming a huge problem here in America. So 30 years ago, 1 in every 16 men of prime working age, between the ages of 25 and 54, so people you'd expect to be in the workforce, 1 in 16 30 years ago were not in the workforce, meaning they didn't have a job and they weren't looking for a job. Today, it's 1 in 8, so it's doubled, actually more than double, because the population has gotten bigger. So, and economists are having a hard time explaining exactly why this is happening. I mean, a lot of people are looking into this, but it's a huge diminishment in people in their prime working years who aren't working and aren't contributing productively to the economy. One explanation is there's been a huge spike in the Social Security disability insurance program. So it's kind of like the income program of last resort. So a lot of people are turning to that and living off these programs. But I mean, it's hard to achieve the American dream when you stop working. So I think that's another critical factor that I know Europe has kind of led in that, unfortunately, with their social welfare programs, but I think we're catching up. So, I mean, that's another thing to watch in the future as a reason for the gradual, or maybe in this case, rapid diminishment of the American dream. Now, I think another key element of the American dream is home ownership. And in the Bay Area, as we know, it's so I'll use darn expensive to find a place to live. And it's kind of creeping across the country. And I think, so 3 areas I just kind of wanted to mention quickly in this area. One is Bay Area politicians love affordable housing mandates, right? Inclusionary zoning is the other word for it. So if you build a development, a housing development, you have to make sure that a certain percentage of the housing is sold below market rate. And that percentage, we just kind of had a battle in San Francisco to up that percentage, so there's kind of a fight ongoing here. But if you have to sell something below market rate, of course, if you're the developer, that's a tax. So what happens when you tax something, you get less of it. And that's what we're seeing with these inclusionary mandate zoning rules. So for example, housing production, if you look at housing production in the Bay Area before inclusionary zoning and after, my colleague Ben Powell at the Independent Institute did this study. Housing production dropped 30% in the Bay Area after inclusionary zoning was enacted. And as I said, I mean, there's ongoing debates to increase that percentage, so effectively to increase the tax. Right now the tax is about $44,000 on average per unit that you're going to lose because of this inclusionary zoning. In Los Angeles and Orange County, new housing production dropped 60% after inclusionary housing mandates were enacted. So it's a huge reduction in the housing stock long term, and of course, reduce the supply of something, the price is going to go up. In California, just a little factoid, about 85,000 units of residential housing are built every year in California. For a state of 38 million people, that doesn't really sound like enough, right? It turns out you need about probably between, depending on what area of the state you're in, but like 2 to 5 times more than what we're currently building to even make a dent in the shortage of housing and to bring down the long-term price of it. Another factor that probably a lot of people don't think about in terms of propping up housing prices is that if you can control water, you can control housing. And so in California, what we're seeing a lot of is show me the water laws. these are laws either at the local level or at the state level that says before you can build something, you have to assure us that you're going to have enough water for those units that you're building. But the proof is really severe. Like in California, there's 2 laws that require that you show you can provide water for about 20 years for the housing units that you want to build, and if you want to build more than 500 units. So what's happening is, and it stopped dozens of projects from going forward because the water just isn't there that they can show long term. So it slows down construction. In some cases, things aren't built. But what it really has done long term is it makes developers scale back their projects. So instead of building 1,000 units, they scale it back to 600 or something like that instead. So again, another driving force in reducing the overall long-term housing stock. Of course, what really should be done, right, is free up the water supply in California. Let the price of water truly reflect its actual scarcity in California. Let water flow throughout the state. Randall and I he peer-reviewed a book I'm working on, and we've had discussions on this, but Randall, I think, is right that if you freed up the water supply in California, more of it would flow to the urban areas, and you wouldn't need all these restrictions, and you could build the homes that need to be built. One last point, in terms of restrictions on housing construction in California, is Plan Bay Area. And probably a lot of you guys have heard about it. Here's the actual plan. We have to have a plan, of course, this is California, so you have to have a thick, heavy plan. This is the master plan for housing development, road construction, and land use in California for the next, or actually for the Bay Area, and now 9 counties around the Bay Area, for about the next 25 years. And what, just briefly, what the plan does is that, so here's a picture of the Bay Area, the 9 counties. You see all that green space? That's 75% of the land in California, and it's off limits to development. So all that green you see on this map, you cannot build on this. So that means you can only build in about 25% of what's left. And Plan Bay Area, what it will do is it will force construction for residential housing in the future onto about 5% of Bay Area's land. So it's a real stack and pack plan. It's going to increase density, it's going to increase prices, and most of that 5% where that construction will go to accommodate about 2 million more people are going to move into the Bay Area over the next 25 years. So those 2 million people are going to be forced into this 5% of land that they're allowing to accommodate new residential construction going forward. And it turns out most of it is minority areas. So, you know, one man's blight's another man's home. So basically they're targeting, you know, low-income neighborhoods for this new housing in the future. So add up all those factors: water, inclusionary zoning, Plan Bay Area. What you get is a lot less housing stock than you would if you freed it up. And what we need to do is build, build, build. And that's the only thing that's going to bring the prices down around here. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Lawrence, sorry.
That's
While Randy is preparing his PowerPoint, I give you some numbers from Europe, just some more shocking that, you know, if you fall into this trap.
I'm prepared.
It will be even wow. Still, industrial productivity in Greece shrank by 28% in the last decade. In Italy, 21%, Spain and Portugal, 18%, France, 15%. Guess the only country that was, of course, improving was Germany by 20, plus 20. So all the others go down. And this is just, you know, another number where you can consider why Europe is at stake. Randy, give us some positive news, please.
Well, thank you for Larry for presenting the first half of my presentation, which will give me more time to talk about some of the nitty-gritty on housing. So I'm going to talk about housing. Speaking of Europe, in 1947, Britain was the first country to strictly regulate housing. They passed what was called the Town and Country Planning Act that essentially put 90% of the country off limits to any new development. And since then, almost every Western European country has followed suit. A few Eastern European countries haven't, but of course during the Soviet era they all had very strict land use requirements. In the rest of the world, Australia, New Zealand have pretty much followed Britain's example. In Canada, British Columbia followed Britain's example in the 1960s, Hawaii in 1961, and California in the early 1970s. Now, there's a complicated set of laws that have restricted California development, and I certainly don't have time, in the time allotted here, to tell you how those laws all interact. Larry gave you a few examples, but they're much more detailed than that. But because of these laws, I'm sure you've noticed, housing is more expensive, even though incomes are higher in the Bay Area than most of the rest of the country. Relative to incomes, housing here is 3 to 4 times more expensive than anywhere else. The target to shoot for is Houston, which is the least regulated place in the country. It's the fastest growing urban area in the country, and despite that rapid growth, it still remains extremely affordable. Now, housing prices aren't high because of Airbnb, and they aren't high because of Google buses, which is what some people want you to believe. Instead, they're high because of land use regulation. This is the map that Larry was showing you. The blue is the areas that have been developed, and under Planned Bay Area, those are the only areas that can be developed. 18% of the 9-county region is all that's open to development. 60% is privately owned, it's rural land. A lot of the landowners would love to develop it, but they're not allowed to. Because of this, there's been huge impacts to the California economy. The red here shows during the 1950s the net immigration into the county, into the state. The blue shows since 1990 the net ex-migration out of the state because of high housing prices. A lot of them going to Texas. But it's not, and it also has a huge impact on the national economy. There's one study that says because of land use regulation in California and a few other states, our national GDP is almost 10% less than it ought to be. That's about $1.7 trillion we're losing because of these land use regulations. It also hurts, especially hurts low-income people and minorities. Between 2000 and 2010, the San Francisco Bay Area grew by almost 300,000 people. But the black population shrank by almost 50,000 people. If you just look at where people are going, San Francisco is the most racist city in America, by far. Now, it turns out that's the key. We're going to be able to unravel this because of a twist in the Fair Housing Act called disparate impact. The Department of Housing and Urban Development wrote regulations saying if a city passes land use rules that are not intentionally discriminating against blacks or other minorities, but they effectively discriminate against blacks or other minorities, that's as much a violation of the Fair Housing Act as if you put up a sign that said no blacks allowed. And they specifically said land use rules are one of the 2 main potential ways to violate it. Now this went to the Supreme Court. And I have to say, the Cato Institute, my employer, the Pacific Legal Foundation, the Reason Foundation, and the Competitive Enterprise Institute all submitted an amicus brief against disparate impact. But the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, agreed disparate impact violates the Fair Housing Act. So I say, let's use it. Now the law says, or the HUD rules say, if you make housing more expensive, you can get away with it if you pass 2 tests. The first test is there a legitimate reason that overrides the discriminatory effect of your rules? So we have to look, why are they have these strict rules that confine, in California, 95% of the population to 5% of the state? Well, the first thing they'll tell you is they have to protect farmland and open space and wildlife habitat. The thing is, as I said, 95% of the people today are confined to 5.5% of the state. That's the most concentrated of any state in the country. if we got rid of all these rules and let California sprawl out, just like the rest of the country is sprawled, to affordable levels, it would be 8.5%. So there'd still be more than 90% of the state for wildlife habitat and farms and forests and other things like that. Well, then they say, well, we have to do it because more compact development saves energy and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, that might be considered a legitimate reason for making housing more expensive. I don't think saving farmlands is a legitimate reason because we have an abundance of farmlands. But global warming, that might be a legitimate reason. So then we have to look at the second test. And that second test says, is there another way you can accomplish that without having the disparate impact on low-income minorities? And the answer is yes. In fact, compact development has almost no effect on greenhouse gas emissions. The Planned Bay Area optimistically projected, very optimistic assumptions, projected that all the densification they were planning would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1.1%. And I think that's very optimistic because, in fact, there's been an incredible amount of densification in the last 30 years, and greenhouse gas emissions grew, they didn't shrink. There are much better ways of reducing energy, saving energy, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions if we just give people incentives to buy Priuses and plug-in hybrids and electric cars. That'll save a lot more energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions a lot more than compact development and trying to force people to live in high-rise apartments instead of single-family homes and forcing blacks out of our communities because they can't afford to live here anymore. So I'm looking for somebody who's willing to put up the money to hire a lawyer to sue Santa Clara County and all the other counties around here for their urban growth boundaries and sue the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So if anybody wants to volunteer, let me know. Even if you don't have that kind of money, if you're interested in this subject, shameless self-promotion, I have a few copies of my book, American Nightmare, that talks about these issues in detail. If you're just interested in the disparate impact arguments, the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, Hawaii is the only state that's more expensive than California. The Grassroots Institute of Hawaii has published a paper I wrote on disparate impact. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you for also sticking to time. Without further ado, Yaron Brook, another author here.
Thank you,
Well-known
Barbara.
author.
Thank you.
Talking about the road to serfdom from Austria to America, or the American dream.
Was that it?
Go ahead.
Oh, that's the title. I guess we should say something positive. This has been pretty depressing. Because we're sitting here and I look around, and it's pretty cool, right? We're talking about the American dream, and you look outside, and there is the American dream. I mean, I remember 20, 25 years ago, John will correct me, there was nothing here. Or what was here was, you wouldn't want to walk here at night, right? And everything south of Market was horrible, right? And if we're talking about the American dream, we can't ignore that it's, to some extent, alive and well here. Not in many parts of the country, but certainly south of Market, Silicon Valley. This is the American dream. This is what it's about. And we have to have that perspective because this is what, if everything we've heard and much, much more, we're likely to lose. All this beauty, this development, the wealth creation, the technology that we all benefit from, that was created by an American dream. So what is it? What is it, the American dream? What is it that Europeans don't have? Because they don't have an American dream. What makes America different than Europe? What is the fundamental, I'd say, over the last 200 years? And we're becoming more alike, which is the depressing news. But there's still something different about Europe and the United States that makes America, I think, still special. And I think it's the idea, the romantic idea, the idealization of freedom, of individual freedom. It's individualism that is uniquely American. Now, it's got roots in Europe because it comes from the Scottish and to some extent the French Enlightenment. But it manifests in the United States of America for the first time in human history in a country, in a state, in a government that was created in order to protect that one thing. Obviously hasn't done such a good job lately, but that was the idea. The idea that you as an individual own your life. It's yours. It doesn't belong to the tribe, to the king, to the group, to the pope, to anybody else. It's yours. Europe still struggles with that notion. Collectivism is strong in Europe and always has been. America is an anti-collectivistic country. It is a country of individualism. It's the country where individual freedom is what matters. In what individual freedom is what needs to be protected. That is the foundation of what this country is. And that manifests itself choosing your own job, buying whatever type of house you want, wherever you want, where the state has no role in dictating your profession or where you buy or what kind of terms you negotiate with the other side. That is what is slowly disappearing, in spite of the remnants of this individualism that still exists in the American spirit. And again, I think you see that manifest in entrepreneurship here in Silicon Valley. Now, I'll do a shameless plug for my book, Equal is Unfair, which is in the back, because I think one of the ways in which we are seeing the idea of individualism being undercut, I'd say over the last 10 years in the United States, is through this idea of equality. Now again, this is a long time European idea of the nobility, the virtue of equality of outcome. Now, we can't actually get there. We've tried, right, with the Soviet Union and others, but it's an ideal. We want to strive towards it. We want to, it's the beautiful platonic thing that we all want to go for. That's been a perception in Europe. When you ask people in America what they think about income inequality, they've always said, who cares, right? I don't envy the guy across the street. I want to be the guy across the street. I'm going to work hard to achieve what the guy across the street has achieved. We've always had this individualistic perspective about income and wealth. I'm concerned about my freedom to pursue my values, and some of those might be related to wealth and income, but they might not be. And somebody else is creating more value than I am? Cool, that's great. Let them be richer than I am. I don't care. That's being the American attitude. So we don't chop down tall poppies, as the Australian phrase is. We let them bloom. We encourage them. Again, Silicon Valley, a good example of that. We've always admired wealth and success. Europe has been the opposite. If you think about it, why? I think the roots go back. If you think about it, how did people get rich 500 years ago? How did you get rich 500 years ago?
Landowner.
Yeah, you stole it. I'm interpreting your claim, right? I mean, 500 years ago, how did you become an aristocrat? You robbed. You were, the robber baron idea was not industrialists in America. It was the idea of aristocrats in Europe. The way you became wealthy before capitalism was by taking from other people, by exploiting them, really exploiting. Not the pretend exploitation of today, real exploitation, where they had no rights and you took stuff from them. So the perception deep down in the European psyche is anybody who's wealthy is a crook. I mean, my mother told me any millionaire, whenever you meet, they've done something shady in their life. Right? And she was serious. She was not kidding. And that's very much a European attitude. Sorry, Barbara, but it's reality. Right? In America, we create wealth. We don't take wealth. We don't redistribute wealth. We create wealth. We make money. Make, create, not redistribute, not take. The whole psyche of America is built on the idea of making, creating, building out of nothing. It's the idea that wealth is not stolen, but built. This is a country of capitalism. This is a country that was created at the beginning of capitalism and grew because of capitalism, at the height of capitalism. Of course, capitalism, freedom, that's what they, in my mind, the two are the same. And that's what's being undercut today. What we're seeing today with the whole equality, the whole inequality crisis, Everybody's talking constantly about the dangers, the evils, the craziness of inequality. And they're trying to undercut this American spirit of, no, I don't care what somebody else makes. That's their business, not mine. I care about whether I'm free enough to create my dream, my American dream. So they're trying to undercut our freedom, undercut the dream, undercut the future with this entire inequality debate. And you can't open up a newspaper today without there being some headline about some problem being attributed to inequality. I mean, everything now is attributed to inequality. Now, there are real problems in America today. Poor people, as we've just described, minorities are being priced out of housing markets. They're being institutionalized into poverty because of licensing laws and minimum wages. We've got an economy that's not growing, so the middle class is kind of not really vibrant and exciting. And at the top, we've got a lot of people who became rich because of cronyism, not because they created money, but because they're using the European method of stealing it. Right? Barbara knows everything I'm saying is true, so I don't really have to apologize. Right? So we've got cronyism at the top. Now, all of those are problems. Poverty is a problem that needs to be looked at, particularly given the government is what is expanding it. The lack of growth in the middle class is a problem. Cronyism is a problem. Not a single one of those problems has anything to do with inequality. Yet every one of them today is being attributed to that. So what we need is to return to that spirit of individualism, that idea of you take care of yourself, you take care of your own life, you're responsible for your own life, you help the people you want to help voluntarily, but your responsibility is the self, and that we respect that as a society, we respect that as a political system, and we need to avoid the collectivism that is so dominant among the left and dominant among the right, and certainly dominant in Europe and crossing over the ocean fast. Europe is where you go to study history. It's a dying continent. It's sad, but it's dying. America's the present. I have a feeling the future's in Asia. Certainly when you go there, you see a younger, more dynamic, more exciting. And when you look at China, sometimes I think they're a little bit more individualistic than even we are. They lack a lot, and they still are seeking that individual freedom. But I don't think they're worried about inequality in China, let's put it that way. We're worried about inequality in China because we've been perverted. Our concepts are being distorted, but they don't seem to be worried. They're too busy living, they're too busy trying to create wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Before opening, I would simply add three more things. The direct correlation between tax rates and foreign direct investment, the direct correlation between the rule of law and foreign direct investment, and the direct correlation between structural reforms and foreign direct investment. And guess what? We lack all those three things in Europe. But there is also good news. There are economic experiments being started around the world, and especially one in Honduras, where we create special economic zones which lack those disadvantages that we have seen in Europe and also many of those in the US. So who is also interested in that, we can discuss this at the panel. And the first question is here. Go ahead, please. Who are you addressing the question to?
My question is for Jaren, but perhaps it's also a larger question about the framing of the topic for this first panel. Jaren, you talked a lot about America being an individualist country, the American attitude, we create wealth, we don't take wealth, and you're saying we need to avoid that collectivism. I would challenge you that by framing all these things in terms of the we being America, you're actually enforcing that collectivism. Nationalism is a collectivist ideology. Saying that these are American ideas, that is a collectivist ideology. When I look around the country at people who should be for individual liberty, individual rights, economic freedom, often they oppose these things on the grounds of that collective ideology of American nationalism. So I think we should be very wary of anything that feeds into that, of promoting the idea that these ideas are somehow uniquely American. No, any country, any people in the world, regardless of country, as individuals, that they pursue or are allowed to pursue these ideas, can achieve these freedoms. You know, there's nothing specifically American about it. To the extent that we identify these ideas with America, we are buying into reinforcing the collectivism that is killing people.
So I agree with you completely about nationalism. Nationalism is an evil form of collectivism and a horrible, horrible thing. But look, America is different. It's different because the institutions here be different. It's different because this is a land of immigrants, in spite of Donald Trump. This is a land of immigrants, and therefore people who came here had a certain spirit about them, and the people who stayed didn't. So it was created in a certain environment with certain ideas at its core that inspired it. Now, of course, freedom is good for all individuals, right? But there are certain geographic areas in which people recognize it, and there are certain geographic areas where people try to reject it. And
It's
then
an oversimplification, though.
of course it's an oversimplification, right? I mean, we're not doing a 3-hour lecture. We could do a 3-hour lecture, but that's a fact. I'm not American by birth, right? I chose to be here, right? Because I wanted to be free. And the country that I was born in, I was less free than I thought it would be in America. So I came to America because here the institutions are structured still in a way that allows for more individual freedom than in other countries. And indeed,
In some
throughout,
cases, yes.
for the most part, as compared to other countries, travel around the world, go to Europe, go to my country, Israel, go to the Middle East, go to Latin America, and you will discover that this country has there's Silicon Valley here and nobody else for a reason. Now,
If you look at the international rankings, America is not number one.
It's number 18.
The Fraser Institute, the Heritage
I get
Institute.
that. You know, Barbara doesn't want to get into an argument one-on-one, but look, you don't measure everything through economic variables. You don't measure everything just from tangible numbers. The fact is,
Not number one in civil liberties
Okay,
either.
can we, you know what, I'll make a suggestion. We will continue this conversation at Lost Point. I'll take over to Mark.
Also,
And,
for Yaron,
Yeah.
your comments about individualism were very inspiring, and I like them a lot. So it surprised me when I looked at ARI's website earlier today, and I saw an older article about supporting using nuclear weapons against Muslim countries.
Yep.
And the idea was that, well, everyone in that country either supports jihadism or they implicitly support jihadism because they're not doing anything about it. That seems to me to be a very collectivist approach, mass killing people. How do you reconcile this?
so that is not said in the article that everybody there either supports jihadism or, you know, by default supports jihad. Obviously, there are innocent people in every country, right? Children. You know, you can easily say children. My view is this, and again, we could get into a heated debate about this, and I have on many occasions, so, and I'm sure Barbara doesn't want that. My view is when I'm defending myself, I need to do what I need to do to defend myself. And if innocent people get in the crossfire, so be it. I'm defending myself. I believe my life is more valuable than anybody else's. I'm going to defend myself. People from those countries are out to kill us. Not everybody, of course not everybody. Certainly not the children, right?
He said us, not we. Collectivism.
Every time you use us as our collectivism, that is a false use of the term. It's an ism. Ism means an ideology. It doesn't mean the casual use of us. That would be ridiculous.
Not casual.
So, I mean, again, there's a lot more to say about the morality of war and what kind of weapons are okay and when you use them and what is an attack and who's attacking whom. But it's a complex topic. But in my view, to defend myself, I would use whatever weapons necessary, and if the collateral damage, so be it. And you know, given that we live in a world where there are countries, and I'm not an anarchist, so I believe countries are a good thing, not a bad thing, a necessary good, not a necessary evil. Countries have a role in defending my life. So the role of the military, the American military, only role of the American military, is to defend the lives and property of American citizens. That's it. And their job is to do whatever is necessary to defend my life. And then it's a question, what is necessary? And certainly we can disagree on that. But that's the context.
Mrs. Smith?
Yeah, I wanted to return to the housing issue, a little
Please.
smaller topic. This goes back to the issue of what you're talking about, Larry, about, and also Randall. conversations I've had with the mayor of Petaluma, which is a small town up here, they're having, you know, up in the north they were having huge issues with traffic congestion. And there's the idea that developers really do hate, which is the idea of impact fees. Namely, when you're building out a large project without actually considering the impact it's going to have on the existing community's ability to circulate, you can create a great deal of opposition to any development because the traffic situation, our society is built around cars. And you can actually create a kind of arterial sclerosis, as it were, that brings economic benefits to a halt for the people that are currently living in these communities. And so I think before we, or at least a part of the conversation concerning housing development, residential development, really has to do with including the cost in these projects of the impact for traffic, the fact that there has not been a new power plant built in the state of California, and they're even thinking about turning off San Antonio new plant, and the issue, of course, of digging deeper holes and building new reservoirs. These are all things that have to be taken in, and sewage. These are things I think that have to be built into these costs before you're going to make them politically acceptable to the existing community. And that's a conversation I think we should have.
I think that's completely wrong. I think impact fees are completely wrong. I think what you need to do is look and see what happens in Texas. All of those problems are taken care of without impact fees in Texas. Just to let you know, to build a house in the San Francisco Bay Area, the impact fee is probably going to be around $50,000, maybe more. In Houston, the hookup fee is $1,800. That's it, hookup to sewer and water. That's your only impact fee. And how do they get away with that? The way they do it is, if the developer puts in a development, the developer puts in all the infrastructure and then charges a fee to the home buyers for the next 30 years. And that pays back the cost of all the infrastructure. So the key is, if you have an impact fee, that's an upfront cost. That makes the cost of all housing more expensive right up front. Not just new housing, but all existing housing. Because if you start charging a $50,000 impact fee, existing homeowners say, hey, the cost of new housing just went up $50,000, so we can raise the price of our house $50,000 and get a windfall from it. So they don't have those kind of windfalls in Houston, in Texas. How do they deal with transportation? Toll roads. They're building toll roads all over the place. The tolls are paying for the roads. And they're being built cheap. They cost like $2.5 million a lane mile to build a 4-lane freeway with on and off ramps and everything else. Meanwhile, here in California, they're spending $200 million a mile building a light rail line that's going to carry about 20% of one freeway lane. That light rail line, obviously, and that $200 million a mile is generous. San Francisco, of course, is building the Central Artery, which is almost $1 billion. Los Angeles has just proposed to build an 11-mile light rail line that will be $900 million a mile. Almost $1 billion a mile for a light rail line that will carry less than 1/5 of a freeway lane that you could have built for $2.5 million a mile. So you're doing it wrong. That's why it's expensive. That's why you got these impact fees that people think they are owed and so on and so forth. You need to look at Texas and see how they do it there. And they do it without making housing unaffordable.
And we have a great book that I think would answer a lot of your questions on this. It's called The Voluntary City. And it shows how you can do these things voluntarily, contractually, without involving government and holding everything up.
3 more questions. The gentleman here with the beard, and there's a Jensen, and now Bob.
Well, in Port of Adalman, going to Bucky's fitness exchanges in the 68 conventions, Bucky's quoted as saying inequality is freedom breeds inequality. I like to revise that to nature breeds inequality. In other words, the gas for freedom of Roosevelt had his for freedom, there's an outcome or something. Himmler was for freedom for Europe, Jewish for Europe, as Stalin had the ideas of freedom. And so there's, two kinds of individualism, two kinds of collectivism. There's natural individualism. I can't imagine manufactured individuals, but there's two kinds of collectivism as well. There's the manufactured, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, the United States, and there's natural collectivism like a family. This provided advice to the health individuals or whatever. These are natural. Stockholders are natural collective people. And it's more expansive. I just whether your comments on that are that its nature whatever means freedom.
I want to say something about inequality. I've noticed that whenever the left raises a problem, the first response of libertarians is to say it's not a problem. The second response is to say, well, it's not a big problem. And we need to get to the third response is, well, the problem was caused by government. If you didn't have government causing the problem in the first place, it wouldn't be there. And that's the real truth about inequality. Inequality is a real problem. And it's not between the 1% and the 99%. That's a total lie. It's between the 30% of people who have college educations and are living in places like San Francisco and are making $100,000 a year or more, and the 70% of people who don't have college educations, who've seen their jobs exported overseas or being replaced by immigrants who are willing to work for really cheap. And meanwhile, we have put up barriers to them by making housing expensive, by making education expensive, by making it hard to start your own business. We put up enormous barriers, and we are the problem for inequality. We, the 30%, are the reason why there's inequality problems. And it is a real problem, and we need to dismantle a lot of government institutions to solve that problem. We shouldn't just deny it exists.
So I'm going to disagree if I can. I'll agree with the solution. The solution is clearly, but the problem is not inequality. We don't know in a free market whether inequality would expand or shrink. Who cares? What we know, when 300 years ago we were all poor. The 19th century saw a massive expansion in inequality because of freedom. You're right, inequality is a feature of nature, it's a feature of reality, and it's a feature of freedom. And under freedom you get inequality. Good, we're not the same. It's a reflection of our nature.
It's just tough to admit it politically, openly.
But if we don't, we lose. This is exactly what's happening. We're losing because we want to.
I actually have a question on resolving some of these issues because in a democracy, the decisions are made politically, and it seems to be there's a lot of complaining here about the march which has been progressing towards land use restrictions, and it comes out of the political process. Are there other measures that you have thought of that could be used for decision making? One was a chart of people moving into and out of California, and yet the people who are here seem to like the way the situation is. Is there some way that we could step back rather than just sort of yelling at each other and look at some other data source that was useful to resolve some of these issues?
There's a lot of data showing that incomes are higher in California not because people here are smarter, but because they forced all the low-income people out. And it's made it a very imbalanced state, and it's not just California, it's about a dozen states are doing this. 40 to 45% of the housing in the United States has been made artificially expensive because of local land use rules. And so people are moving to the other 55%. People are moving to places where they were moving away from 30 years ago. And I think disparate impact is providing us a way out because we don't have to rely on democracy. We don't have to convince the majority of Californians to get rid of those laws. We don't have to convince one person, a federal judge. And we convince that one person and maybe 3 more circuit court judges, and we can have all those laws thrown out.
Okay, thank you. Last question, Bob, and then we switch to the next panel.
Okay, this question is for Lawrence and Randall. It's sort of an investment type question. Maybe you can give us some insight here in the people in the San Francisco area. You got an area down here, Tenderloin, which is dilapidated buildings, rundown buildings, homeless all over the place. You got boom area all around. I'm sure there's all kinds of restrictions and regulations that cause that area. That's going to be extremely valuable land. But what do you see happening in that particular area over the next 10, 20 years? regulations going to be changed somehow? Will developers be able to get in there, or is it all going to remain like it is today?
If you pay off the right politicians, it'll get developed. That's my answer. That's how the cities work.
Famous Ronald Reagan quote was, if it moves, tax it. If it still moves, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. And that's what's going to happen is they've regulated it so much that developers can't develop it, so they're going to come in and say, okay, now we need to subsidize development.
Okay, well, thank you. This was the first panel. I will hand over.